So Bas, really happy to have you on the MedTech20 today. Thanks so much for making the time and excited to have a really interesting conversation with you.
Happy to be here, Gordon.
I was trying to think of the last time we actually saw each other in person, and I think that would have been back at PharmaPack when COVID was just kind of starting to take hold.
I think that was over an espresso in a coffee shop near the exhibition center in Paris, correct?
Right, that's right. Well, good to see you virtually anyways. So it's a different world we're living in today.
It is indeed.
Good. So, Bas, I thought where we'd start today, for some people who may not be overly familiar with the LTS business, perhaps we could start there, and you could tell us a little bit about the business, what you're bringing to the market in terms of product offering and that.
Sure, with pleasure. Yes, so LTS is a company that's active in the space of drug delivery and of contract manufacturing. And so we're strictly a B2B company. And what we do is all around transdermal and transmucosal drug delivery, which effectively means it's all about patches and about thin films. And that's a relatively niche part of the drug delivery and CDMO space. And it's a part where we think we have managed to establish ourselves as leaders over the years, and that we're kind of that trusted household name for that part of the industry. You know, like every industry has its, nobody ever got fired for using the proverbial IBM. I think we have that role in the transdermal space. And we've earned that, I think, through some of the innovations that we've brought to the market that helped to create that space. And of course, we continue to work very hard to justify that with the delivery performance that we show to our customers every day.
As I was thinking about what LTS is bringing to the market and that kind of thing, I mean, there's certainly innovation happening both in the drug delivery space, broadly speaking, but also as it relates to LTS. So maybe we could start with just your thoughts on what do you see as some of the drivers of innovation in the space more generally?
Yeah, well, it's a great question because I think identifying those mega trends is a great foundation for all the innovation work that you're going to be doing. Because if an innovation is supported by a mega trend that is out there, the chances of success long term are, of course, amplified. And if I look at the drug delivery space, I would probably mention three things, Gordon, that are strongly interlinked. So the first thing would be patient empowerment. It's about, of course, bringing new therapies to patients, but then also making sure that the therapies that are there allow the patient to continue to enjoy a quality of life as they go through their treatment, and that the condition doesn't end up dominating their life. So everything with regards to reducing side effects, allowing self-administration, saving trips to doctors or to hospitals, I think that is an important trend. And I think that dovetails very well into the second one that I would mention, which is that globally, all of the developed economies are struggling to maintain, to keep in check the cost of their healthcare systems. And so again, things that will take things out of a clinic that will make it easier to administrate, easier to bring to the patient, should enjoy a certain intrinsic benefit from that perspective. And the third one, again, linked to that is digital health, because digital health is potentially a huge enabler of both of those things, which I mentioned before. And of course, digital health is a very, very broad term that encompasses a lot of different things. But the notion of you don't need to go to the clinic and the doctor again in order to be monitored. We can capture the symptoms that people have away from the clinic. We can capture their regime compliance away from the clinic. And we can be much more in real-time contact with our patients. I think all of those things are very strongly tied together and working in the same direction. But it's actually interesting to see, because if it's reinforcing each other so strongly, you might ask yourself, why isn't it going faster? And I think that has a lot to do with the complexity of the stakeholder system in the pharma industry, because there are so many stakeholders that need to line up their interests. The patients, the pharma company, the distribution channels, then the payers, and ultimately, in many cases, also the governments. And getting all of that to coalesce around different types of solution is probably one of the most interesting challenges that we have in front of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess as a bit of a follow-up on that, patient centricity and kind of the patient experience seems to, in the last 5 to 7 years or so, really kind of taken more of a front seat, let's say. Why do you think patient centricity has become more of a focal point?
Yeah. So I think it's back to the fact that we realize that a lot of it, that in many cases, what's good for the patient and what empowers the patient actually also helps to reduce cost. Certainly, new technological developments, including digital health, have helped that. But we also see that there is an increased interest into some of the things that have been there for a longer time. And I think with the things that we do, actually benefit from that to an important extent, because the patch actually, is one of the easiest things that is to administer for a patient. To some extent, it's easier than swallowing a tablet for certain patients. And so we do see a renewed interest into patch technology as a result of that. And the fact that with administration through the skin, you avoid the gastrointestinal tract, you typically have a higher bioavailability. You don't necessarily need, therefore, to compensate for degradation. You may be able to reduce the dosing, which can be important if there are side effects. All of those things have been there, but are certainly, again, getting more attention as we think about this patient centricity perspective.
Well, thanks for sharing all that, Bas. And that is a good holistic and general overview of the market, I would say, in terms of drug delivery. How does that translate into what you guys are doing with LTS and your strategy in terms of growth and any other aspects?
I can talk about that all day, Gordon, but let me try and let me try and summarize that. No, so basically, it's around 3 pillars that we've defined for our growth strategy. So the first one is simply to build upon that reputation as being a strong CDMO in our space. And when it comes to that, I think we see our role as turning into reality the dreams that other people might have, the innovations that other people might be developing. And when it comes to that, we're therapy agnostic. We'll do that for anybody who has a need for manufacturing at a large scale for the technologies that we master. The second part of that growth strategy is really about, we shouldn't just try to fulfill demand that is there. We also see that if we claim to be the leader in this field, then we should also take our responsibility to grow the market. So we have invested and will continue to invest in R&D in order to demonstrate whether more molecules are able to be brought to the formats that we have and to benefit from some of the benefits that I outlined to you just now. And so we'll continue to invest into R&D in order to increase that market space, bring those benefits to more patients. We know that we're going to hit boundaries with that, with regards to the molecules that will fit into our formats. And so the third element of the strategy is really about bringing breakthrough innovation to the toolbox of the pharma companies when it comes to drug delivery, finding novel ways to allow more molecules to pass through the skin or into the skin. And that's where I think you can classify our microarray program, which is one of our biggest R&D programs, and where we're really bringing a whole range of new molecules in scope of these kind of drug delivery that you can apply, in that case, through the skin, not onto the skin.
Really, really interesting. I mean, I think a lot of the CMOs and CDMOs these days are not necessarily investing in the same way that you're talking about in terms of trying to, again, going back to the innovation piece, trying to drive some innovation and create new ways and new thinking for the strategic partners that they work with.
And I would agree with that. So I always like to think of ourselves as a hybrid between a drug delivery innovator and a CDMO. And in certain parts of the industry, those are logically and easily separable. I worked in injectables, and there, everything around the primary drug packaging and a device is, developed by other people than people who do the fill finish.
Yeah.
but a patch, is made in one step. And so whoever's, innovating around that technology also is the logical go-to partner to then go and make that.
Well, good. So, a question that I've been asking all the guests on the MedTech20, and it's something probably we're all getting a little bit tired of talking about, and hopefully there's some light at the end of the tunnel here. But what have some of the impacts of COVID been on your business? I mean, I think the obvious stuff is more people are working from home and that kind of thing. But have there been some other lessons, maybe more specific to the business itself that you've learned along the way in the last 12 months, would you say?
Definitely. I think what we realized is just how resilient our business has shown to be in this period of crisis, and also how resilient our relationships have turned out to be in this period of turmoil and of crisis. Because let me quote you an example. We do a regular customer survey, and we had one coming up at the back end of last year, and we decided to insert a question around how do you feel our relationship has been influenced by the fact that we're now living this pandemic. And a full 80% of the respondents said we feel that the relationship is as good as ever. And the remaining 20% actually said we feel it is better.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I think that's testimony, therefore, to the resilience of the teams across the boundary of the company. And I think that also is just an expression of something that everybody has come to realize with more intensity as a result of this situation, and that is the importance of work as an anchor, as a source of stability in our lives, and as a source of relationships in our lives. And that is very true within the company, but it's definitely also true across companies with those partners with whom we've been working sometimes for decades. And I think it's a great privilege to be working in an industry that is so resilient to such a shock. It's a great privilege to then also be able to contribute to that sense of stability that I think is very important psychologically to our own people and to our customers. As you read all of this news in the newspaper, and we go from hope to despair as we go from the down curve into the third wave.
Yeah, and I think as troubling as COVID has been, I think maybe this is even more so in the space that we both work in. But I think there's something that is actually unifying about that as well, knowing that we're all kind of going through the same challenges. And I think I certainly feel that a lot of the relationships that I have been kind of strengthened, like you said, through that kind of unifying piece of all of us facing the same thing.
Exactly. And there's one other thing that I'll mention is we've seen that with the speed that we've been able to develop in order to bring vaccines to the market, that the pharma industry has demonstrated that it can be a whole lot faster than we typically assume we can. And it will be very interesting, and I think very fruitful, if we can hold on to some of the things that we've done differently to allow that. And some of those things, are unique because probably we prioritize, and by speeding up some things, other things have slowed down. But I do believe that there's also parts of it where we've realized that we can speed up the process without cutting corners.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think the pharma industry should really look at and see to what extent can we bring that in the way that we do the rest of our innovations moving forward.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I don't think on reflection at the beginning of this at the beginning of the crisis, I think we were all really trying to get back to the way we were used to operating very quickly. But I think 12 months in, we're actually seeing some things that we can do differently that are actually advantageous. So yeah, I would agree with that. Well, good, Bas. Thanks again for sharing that. I know that through our discussions, one of the topics that's kind of dear to your heart and is certainly a topic of conversation more generally for the last 15 years or so is really around the diversity and inclusion piece. And like I said, I know that's quite important to you on a personal and professional level. What is your assessment when you look around what different organizations are doing? Where are we today? What can we be doing better at really moving the needle or moving things forward in a practical way in terms of diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, well, let me start with the perspective on part of your question, which is about how are we doing? And I think the fair answer is I don't think we're doing that great in terms of the results that we've managed to achieve at the level of our societies. Because if you think back to the last century, women's lib in the 60s, 70s, 80s broke down a lot of barriers. I think by the 2000s or so, we were making sure that, at the output of our education systems, we actually had achieved quite a balanced kind of perspective, and the diversity was there to a much bigger extent than it had ever been. But then we started to realize that it wasn't filtering through to the levels above that. And then somehow glass ceilings, other selection mechanisms, bias, etc., still played its role to prevent the talent from staying as balanced as that all the way to the top. And I think it was 17 years ago or so that I first sat into a meeting on diversity. And if you think about, how much progress have we made since then yeah, I think the fair answer is not as much as we'd hoped, and probably not as much as we should have made. And then if you think about why that is, then of course it's not so easy. But you try and look at that from the perspective of, okay, so what do we need to do now in order to then gain more momentum and break through the remaining barriers? And as far as I'm concerned, I'm very encouraged by the fact that the topic remains very much in the forefront. I don't think I've ever seen so much attention paid to International Women's Day as the one that we just had behind us a couple of weeks ago. And I really do like the motto that was chosen for that, this motto of choose to challenge. And I would like to encourage women to challenge, but definitely also men to challenge. Because one topic that keeps recurring is that for women, it's not always that easy to speak up. There's still this barrier that prevents you from doing so because you don't want to be perceived as difficult or otherwise, unfriendly, or create a difficult moment for somebody else. And that's where this notion of being an ally is, I think, a very important one. And that's why I very much like this message of choose to challenge. But if you think about it more, then I think we need to be smart about the other things that we do, apart from cranking up the volume. And that's where hopefully there'll be more of a mechanism to look back at everything that's been tried and then an analysis of what has worked, because I think we do have pockets where great progress has been made, and also understanding what hasn't worked. And making sure that those insights get out there in a much bigger way.
Yeah, I completely agree, and let's continue to drive things hopefully at a quicker pace.
No, and I continue to be very passionate about it because I think it's just a necessity. I think it's an ethical, it's a moral obligation to make sure that people are treated equally. I think it's a societal necessity that we get the most out of the talent that we educate and that is out there. And I think at the end of the day, it's also very simple business economics. On that part, at least, there's lots of research right now that demonstrate that, diverse teams, companies with diverse leadership, with diverse boards, outperform companies that do not have that. And so from that perspective, I do see a commitment that is unrelenting to go and push this further and further.
We're trying to work with diverse audiences in terms of customers and patients in the healthcare sector, and we should be hearing those voices around the table as well, I think.
Yeah. Now, and one of the interesting solutions that is out there that has always been subject to some debate is the use of quota. And you know how in many places, and including with myself, initially you're like, yeah, as an objective, fine, but as a hard quota, does anybody want to appoint somebody? Does anybody want to be appointed just to fill a quota? And so there was a lot of hesitation around that over many years. I think today we see that places where quota have been put in place are probably performing better than places where it hasn't.
Yeah.
And so as we're smart and try to learn from what has worked and what hasn't, I think we need to open up to that.
So, Bas, you've served on a number of boards for several different organizations throughout the course of your career. Obviously, we all know that boards are kind of typically formed of executives with different experiences, and kind of segueing off the diversity piece, lots of different opinions around the table, and that creates opportunity for interesting discussions, but can sometimes create some differences of opinion, let's say, on how to tackle different issues and obstacles. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, working with these boards. I mean, what makes a board effective, or on the other side, what do you think holds back a board from being effective in its responsibilities to a business?
That's actually a very broad question, Gordon, because there's clearly lots of aspects to that when it comes to making sure that the board, the foundation is a really strong level of risk management and compliance and those kind of things. But I think you're talking more about, let's say, the strategic discussions and decision making around those kind of things. So I think one of the challenges that boards face is, how do we balance our time between information sharing, being updated about everything that's going on, and with that being in the present and partially in the past, versus reserving time for dialogue, for discussions around the future. And so I think managing that in a good kind of way, in an interaction between the chair and the CEO, is already a very important part. And then I think when it comes to tackling those subjects which are more about the future, I think what's really important is that you tackle them and talk about them at a time where you're ready to start to make decisions, but you haven't quite made up your mind. And so why do I say that? Because if, let's say, management is already too far advanced in its thinking and is really needing an urgent decision, often it kind of boils down to, here's the resolution, and say yay or nay. And it really prevents you from getting added value from your board, because all they get to do is approve or reject something that's already on the table, and it becomes much more of a power play. So if you want to have the benefit of the added value of your board, you need to make sure that you table these topics earlier on, at a stage where you can then have a dialogue around, so how do we see the topic that's in front of us? How do we see the issue? How do we frame that? And that you can exchange around that. Then you talk about the options that you have in front of you, and that probably starts with some options that management would be proposing to you and laying out to you. But that's where the board can start to add value by building upon those perspectives and potentially coming up with modifications, adjustments, reframing, and additional perspectives. And if you can do that, I think ultimately you will reach better decisions. And so what you need for that is a couple of things. You need board directors who are well prepared, who will come into the meeting with actually a strong opinion, but who are equally ready to then listen to the other members of the team and to build upon their own opinion, to go and build something which is better than the best individual contribution at the start of the session. And I think that's where diversity is so important, because if you do not have diverse perspectives, that mechanism will never work. Then you'll all fall in line behind who happens to be the expert. And it's only if you have different type of perspectives, if you have diversity, that you can then really build upon each other, and the team ultimately ends up being stronger than the strongest link.
Yeah, really interesting. And, I guess one of the questions that I would have for you in follow up to that, in my work, I speak with a lot of people that are looking to take on their first board assignment. What would you advise for somebody who's looking to take on their first board position?
Well, there's a few of them. I think certainly it's about, make sure that you're comfortable that you can devote the right amount of time to it. Make sure that you can balance that well with your other activities from a time point of view, but also from a conflict of interest point of view. I think that's an important consideration. Um, what you, of course, will always try to do, and what, of course, the companies will always look for is a connection with their business in your resume, in your experience, so that you can add value with your perspectives. Um, and I think you should leverage that going into those sessions, but at the same time you should find a balance, with learning and with opening up yourself to the ideas of management of that company, and of course of your fellow board members. And I think that transition, and I've certainly felt it that way also, from when am I in an executive role and I'm really in the driver's seat, and when am I in a board role, you have to behave differently.
Yeah.
Because as a board member, you are not running the company, management is running the company. And that reflex sometimes, is there for people to overstep the boundary and start to, engage in a way where you risk getting onto onto management seats.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And, I think the mind frame to go into some of these things is that, yes, you are there to contribute, but also think of this as a learning opportunity to learn from peers that may or may not be from the same industry, but with diverse backgrounds. So, Bas, as we round out the conversation here a little bit, one of the things we talked about at the beginning of the podcast here was around innovation in the drug delivery space, but we didn't touch too much on some of the innovative things that LTS are working on. Are there some things that you can share with us in terms of new product development that you're excited about and want to talk a little bit about?
Always. And so, well, I think a couple of things I've mentioned before. So I think our microarray program is very important to us, and we're very pleased to see that progressing and partnering with more and more partners. Like I mentioned to you, we continuously work on different types of molecules that could come into a formats that we have, transdermal, intradermal, and the thin films, and perhaps across therapy areas that might not have been the logical combination in the past. Can you do a vaccine via a thin film rather than through the skin or via an injection? Those are the kind of things that are on that radar screen, and so there's plenty of things going on there. And those, to some extent, are things that will mature over a longer term. What we've also taken a look at is, to what extent do patients today actually have access to a state-of-the-art solution of all the proven technologies that are out there. And this is one of the odd things, and to some extent the sad things about the pharma industry. If something gets developed and brought to market 20 years ago, because the cost of change is so high, sometimes imperfections to which now there are improvements are dragged along for a long, long time, and do not get resolved and addressed in the same way as it might be done in other industries. And so we've identified actually that in a number of the therapy areas that we serve, the patch that you would make if you would apply all the state-of-the-art technologies, proven technologies that are out there today, is not actually available to patients in those therapy areas. Because everything that's out there carries some kind of historical burden. Yeah. And I think that's something that we're quite motivated to correct. And so we'll be engaging with customers to see, can we provide the state-of-the-art patch to patients in each of the therapy areas that we support.
Very interesting, very interesting. Well, good. We certainly covered a lot of ground here in the last 20 or 30 minutes here, Bas. Is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners here?
Look, I think the main message that is still there for everybody is just like, let's make sure we stay healthy and that we do everything we can to make our way out of the pandemic. We have a minor role to play in that respect as LTS. We don't produce any of the vaccines or any of the therapeutics, but we do try to make sure that we keep things going through our customers and that we do whatever we can for our teams here. So right now, that's all about making sure that self-tests are available to the teams. So we've been distributing those so that our employees can self-test. And maybe we'll have an opportunity also to accelerate the vaccination program, because in principle, we would have the opportunity to make sure that all of our people get vaccinated once, it's our turn and once the vaccine is available. And through those things, we'll continue to try and make our small contribution to finding our way out of this difficult time.
Fantastic. Well, you're doing great things with LTS, Bas, and really appreciate hearing a little bit about all the great things you're working on. So thanks very much for joining us on the MedTech 20.
Pleasure catching up again, as always, Gordon.